Right now, as we move through the opening stretch of June 2026, forecasters are watching the tropics with a heightened level of attention that the calendar alone would not normally seem to justify, because something is genuinely developing out there that is truly worth paying close attention to. The National Hurricane Center is currently tracking the very first potential tropical system of the entire eastern Pacific hurricane season, and the warning attached to it is notably specific. Forecasters say it could develop into a tropical storm by the middle of next week off the coast of southern Mexico. That, on its own, is exactly the kind of early season activity that draws close scrutiny from forecasters, but it is only one single piece of a much larger and considerably more interesting picture. While the eastern Pacific stirs to life, attention is also turning toward the Atlantic side, where there is a low risk of tropical rain and wind impacts along the United States Gulf Coast, as well as part of the Atlantic coast, in the days ahead. And although the Hurricane Center is currently tracking only that Pacific disturbance as a genuine development threat, meteorologists are already flagging that conditions in parts of the Gulf and the Western Atlantic could become more favorable for tropical development later this month. So what you are actually looking at here is not a single isolated storm, but rather a whole tropical environment that is waking up on multiple fronts at once, noticeably earlier and considerably more actively than the deep quiet that so often defines the very start of the hurricane season. That is what makes this moment unusual, and understanding why requires understanding what June in the tropics normally looks like, and how this June is breaking from that script. To grasp why forecasters are treating early June activity as noteworthy rather than routine, you have to understand the rhythm of the hurricane season and where we currently sit within it. The Atlantic hurricane season officially runs from June 1st all the way through November 30th, while the Eastern Pacific season begins 2 full weeks earlier in mid-May, because the Pacific waters tend to warm up and become favorable for development noticeably sooner than the Atlantic does. The National Hurricane Center has already begun issuing its daily tropical weather outlooks for the 2026 season, the regular updates that highlight any disturbances being monitored across the basins. But here's the crucial context. The opening weeks of any hurricane season are historically the quietest. The deep, explosive activity that produces the most powerful hurricanes typically does not arrive until later in the summer and into the autumn, when ocean heat content peaks and the atmosphere becomes most conducive to rapid intensification. The early part of the season is usually defined by either complete calm or, at most, weak and disorganized systems. So when forecasters begin actively tracking a system with real development potential this early, and when they simultaneously flag multiple regions as worth watching, it stands out against the typical early season backdrop. It absolutely does not mean that catastrophe is somehow imminent. It simply means that the tropical atmosphere is currently more active and more primed for development than the calendar alone would usually suggest. And that is precisely the kind of subtle signal that experienced forecasters never ignore, because the early character of a hurricane season can sometimes hint at the tone of the long months that follow it. The system drawing the most immediate attention is the one in the Eastern Pacific, and it is worth being precise about what it is and what it is not, because precision is what separates real awareness from panic. As of the latest information, this is a disturbance with the potential to organize into a tropical storm by the middle of next week off the coast of southern Mexico. It is not yet a storm. This particular distinction matters absolutely enormously, and it is something the National Hurricane Center itself goes out of its way to emphasize about how these tropical systems actually work. Tropical systems develop in stages. They begin as a disorganized disturbance, a loose area of thunderstorms and low pressure before potentially strengthening into a tropical depression, then a tropical storm, and only eventually, if conditions allow, a hurricane. The overwhelming majority of disturbances never actually complete that full journey. They get torn apart by strong wind shear high above, they drift out over cooler ocean water, or they simply fail to organize themselves into anything coherent at all. So the Eastern Pacific system being watched is a candidate, not a certainty, and the responsible way to understand it is as a system with a meaningful chance of becoming the season's first named storm rather than a guaranteed one. What makes it relevant, even at this early stage, is its location and behavior. The Eastern Pacific season typically sees its earliest storms form in late May or June as ocean waters warm and atmospheric conditions become more favorable. And while many of these storms drift harmlessly westward over open water, systems forming closer to Mexico and Central America are a different matter. Those systems can bring heavy rain, serious flooding, and dangerous surf to populated areas, which is exactly why early season activity near that particular coastline is so closely watched by forecasters and coastal communities alike. What is genuinely unusual about tropical development in June, and what makes this story more interesting than a simple storm tracking update, is the distinctive character that June systems tend to have. The historical record reveals a striking pattern. June storms overwhelmingly stay on the weaker side. In fact, in the entire recorded history of the Atlantic Basin, only 3 Category 3 or stronger hurricanes have ever formed in June. Those 3 were Audrey in 1957, Alma in 1966, and remarkably recently Beryl in 2024. That is an extraordinarily short list for a phenomenon spanning well over an entire century of detailed records, and it tells you in no uncertain terms just how genuinely rare a truly powerful June hurricane really is. The overwhelming majority of June activity does not produce monster storms. But, and this is the part that makes June deceptively dangerous, the threat from these early season systems is different in kind, rather than simply smaller in scale. When a tropical storm or the less common hurricane does form in June, it tends to do so closer to the United States, and typically it is rainfall and flooding, not strong winds, that are the hallmarks of these early bloomers. This is a genuinely critical reframing of what the word danger actually means in the context of June. People very naturally associate hurricane risk with violent, destructive wind, with the dramatic imagery of roofs being torn away and large trees snapped in half. But the real, recurring, and frequently underestimated danger of June systems is water. A weak, disorganized, almost unimpressive-looking tropical system that forms close to the coast can dump tremendous amounts of rain, triggering serious flooding well inland, far from any coastline, and affecting people who never thought of themselves as being in a hurricane's path at all. That tendency for June systems to form close to home is one of the most important things to understand about this period of the season because it changes who is actually at risk. During the opening weeks of the season especially, formations happen closer to home in the Western Caribbean, the Gulf, and off the southeast United States. This stands in sharp contrast to the peak of the season later in the summer, when storms often form far out in the open Atlantic, all the way over near Africa, giving coastal communities many days of advance warning as the systems make their long journey westward across the entire ocean. June is different. A system can spin up in the Gulf of Mexico or the Western Caribbean, practically in the backyard of the Gulf Coast in Florida, and become a rainfall threat with very little lead time. This is precisely why the current low risk of tropical rain and wind impacts along the Gulf Coast, and part of the Atlantic coast genuinely deserves attention right now, even though no named storm has actually formed there yet. In June, the proximity itself is the real danger. A homegrown system simply does not need to be powerful at all to be genuinely disruptive, because it does not give people the comfortable luxury of a full week of preparation time. And it is worth noting that meteorologists have specifically said they will be keeping a close eye on parts of the Gulf and Western Atlantic for potentially more favorable development conditions later this month. So the real message for anyone living along the Gulf Coast in Florida or anywhere along the southeastern seaboard is genuinely not one of alarm, but rather one of simple awareness. This is the time of year when the tropics can produce something close to home with little warning, and the current setup is one that forecasters are watching for exactly that reason. The unusual activity is not confined to the waters near North America, and zooming out to the global picture reveals that the tropics as a whole are notably awake right now. On the entire other side of the planet, in the Western Pacific, Tropical Storm Jangmi has already made its presence strongly felt, impacting Japan's Ryukyu Islands with hurricane-force winds and heavy rainfall. That included the island of Okinawa, where the United States maintains a large military presence across multiple bases. The impacts were tangible and measurable. Kadena Air Base reported a wind gust of 74 miles per hour, and Naha International Airport reported a gust of 77 miles per hour. This matters a great deal to the broader story because it clearly demonstrates that the tropical engine is currently running actively across multiple separate ocean basins simultaneously, and not just in one single isolated spot on the map. When forecasters talk about the global conditions that ultimately influence a hurricane season, they're watching all of these different basins together as one connected whole. Because the large-scale atmospheric and oceanic patterns that govern tropical development simply do not respect the neat boundaries we draw on our maps. Activity in the Western Pacific, the state of the Eastern Pacific, and the conditions brewing in the Atlantic are all expressions of the same global system. Experts are closely watching the East and West Pacific hurricane seasons, which have already started to pick up, alongside the just beginning Atlantic season. The simple fact that multiple ocean basins are all showing early signs of life at once is a large part of what makes this particular moment genuinely stand out, and it strongly reinforces why the systems near North America are being treated by forecasters as part of a genuinely active tropical pattern, rather than as a handful of isolated curiosities. It is essential to be honest and measured about what all of this means, because the goal here is genuine understanding, not fear, and the truth is compelling enough without exaggeration. Nothing whatsoever in the current situation guarantees a destructive storm for anyone. The Eastern Pacific System is a disturbance with the potential to become the season's first tropical storm, not a confirmed hurricane bearing down on anyone. The Atlantic and Gulf threats are described as low risk for now, and the long historical record is perfectly clear that June only very rarely produces genuinely powerful hurricanes. So to be absolutely clear, this is not in any way a forecast of disaster. What it genuinely is an early season tropical environment that is more active and more worth watching than the typical quiet start. With a real development candidate in the Eastern Pacific, multiple zones flagged for possible development near the United States later in the month, and a global tropical pattern that is clearly awake across several basins. That particular combination of factors is unusual enough to genuinely warrant attention, and the right and healthy response to it is calm preparation and steady awareness rather than any kind of anxiety. The opening of hurricane season is the ideal moment to make sure you are ready, regardless of any single system. In practice, that means knowing your evacuation zone ahead of time if you live near the coast, having a basic emergency kit assembled with water, food, essential medications, and a reliable way to receive official alerts, and reviewing your insurance coverage well before any threat is ever on the map. The systems being watched so closely right now may very well amount to very little in the end, or one of them may go on to become the season's very first named storm. Either way, the genuine value of this moment lies in the timely reminder it provides to everyone in a vulnerable area. So here is what to take away, and how to think about the season that is now genuinely underway. The phrase highly unusual is genuinely not hyperbole when it is applied to this particular stretch of early June, because the level of activity really does break from the deep quiet that usually defines the hurricane season's opening weeks. There is a system in the Eastern Pacific with real odds of becoming the first named storm. There are zones near the United States that forecasters are actively flagging for later this month, and the global tropics are demonstrably active, from a typhoon striking Okinawa to multiple basins picking up at once. But unusual very much does not mean catastrophic, and the single most useful framing is to treat all of this as the hurricane season announcing itself clearly and early this year. The character of the danger in June is quite specific and very much worth remembering clearly. The storms are usually weak. Powerful June hurricanes are genuinely rare, with only 3 major ones in all of recorded history. But the systems form close to home, and the real threat is water, heavy rain, and flooding that can reach far inland with little warning. That is the profile to watch for in the coming weeks. Keep a steady eye on the official outlooks coming from the National Hurricane Center, which are now being issued multiple times every single day, because in the tropics conditions can genuinely change very quickly, and a disturbance that looks completely unimpressive one day can organize itself into something more the very next. Stay genuinely aware. Get all of your preparations in order now, while there is still no immediate pressure at all, and treat this early stirring of the tropics as the useful early warning that it truly is. Something genuinely unusual is quietly developing out there right now. And now you understand exactly what it is, precisely why it matters, and what the new season may be quietly signaling to all of us as it begins.